Hey guys, welcome back to another video. We're not dead, it wasn't a one and done scenario. We are pumping the videos out as we promised we would. This is the final sector F1 season review for 2021. This video might be a short one, nothing happened this year of course. It was like every other year in the turbo hybrid era. So we're just going to, go, yep, that was that one race that was alright, and then we're going to go to bed because nothing happened.
Yeah, Mercedes got constructors, nothing else to talk about.
Yeah.
That's
Hambot Ver, standard.
Yep.
Luckily, we do have a good reason to return because there is a lot to discuss, and we're hopefully not going to be, I won't say ranting, but discussing for hours upon hours. I'm sure there's hundreds of other YouTubers and discussions going on out there, so we're just going to try to discuss, I guess, what really
what stood out for
interested us.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things happened, and we both, leading up to this, rewatched all the highlights and read a lot online to see what other people were talking about, because it really has been a long year of racing. When you look back to some of the first races, some of them feel like they were years ago to me, but they were this year. There was so much, and not even at the top, but in the midfield and the back as well. So there's a lot to unpack. So hopefully we can have a good discussion about some of it.
Yeah. I think you said we did the same thing leading up to it as we watched all the race highlights, and there was certain things that they stood out so much at the time, and then because they were halfway back through the year, I was going back and like, oh yeah, that was huge. Why did I forget about that? Oh, that's right. Abu Dhabi happened, and everything else doesn't matter anymore. So but no, it was a really, really exciting season. I wish we could have reported on it a bit more throughout the year. Obviously, we couldn't. We were just a bit too busy this year, but. Hell, it was a good season to watch, at least.
Yep.
I guess we'll just start with the fact, new world champion,
What stood out to you the most? Yeah, okay.
I mean, that stands out.
To start.
Yeah.
Yep.
Max Verstappen getting the world championship. We're not going to talk about the drama. We did a 1 hour, 20-minute video just before. Watch that. We talk about the Abu Dhabi
As did
Grand
everyone
Prix.
else as well, if you want more chat on that.
Exactly,
You watched ours. Go Google it. You'll have another 1,000 videos to watch while they're still coming out.
Max getting the world championship, and hell, he deserved it. Throughout all season, there was this stat going around that in every race that he finished outside of Hungary, where he had that damage, he finished P1 or P2, and it's like the freaking consistent. Like every race where he didn't retire or have damage, he finished P1 and P2, and it's like, okay, that's pretty dominant. It's kind of you see that and you're like, oh, it makes sense that he would win the championship, but for it to be that close, the fact that it was still that close, even with Max finishing effectively P1, P2 in 80% of the races, is insane. But yeah, congratulations to Max. I think he's thoroughly deserved it for the way he's driven this year. So.
Yep, the fact that it is a new guy, the fact that it's Max, the fact that it's, after we've seen years of people going, oh, his style isn't going to work, he's going to blow over, he's never been in a real championship position, some of the race wins he had where he got over Lewis, they went, yeah, that's all good and well, but Lewis is thinking about the championship and that, and then this time it was properly like, yes, he's in the spotlight. It couldn't have been a more intense, critical championship for him to hold his own, and he did it, so it makes it even more, all those years of people doubting his ability and how he would be under pressure, and just, he showed that under pressure, he does the Hamilton. He raises under pressure, when so many other drivers fall. So
that's it,
complete kudos to him.
Yeah,
amazing,
I mean, it's. I think it's rare for someone to come in and. I mean, obviously he's been in Formula One for 7 years now, but this is like you said, the first year he's had a proper championship battle, and he's won it at the first time of asking. And for a driver to have, at their first opportunity to win it, just shows just how good they are, and shows that they can fight at the top. Most drivers, like even Hamilton, his first opportunity, he didn't quite make it.
Towards the end of that year, there were a few critical mistakes that he made, and you can even look at Vettel. Early on in his career, he was up there, but in the later years with Ferrari, when he was challenging Merc, there were a lot of blunders that he really made under pressure. You know what I mean? Even an experienced guy like Vettel at that time.
And still, I guess we'll go to constructors, because like Red Bull and Mercedes were also neck and neck all the way. I had a look at that, and it was effectively Max ahead. It was Red Bull leading into Saudi Arabia, and you're like, oh, this hasn't happened in a long time. And yeah, Mercedes just had let's be honest, I think their car was much more dominant towards the last few races. It kind of all started at Brazil, I think. Let's talk about Brazil, seeing as I brought it up.
Talk about Brazil and even talk about Hamilton. You know, we say that Max is very good, but, you know, Brazil just showed again when the car had been, you know, iffy and when the odds were still against Hamilton to show that, you know, he still was a guy that could rise and do that kind of performance was insane, you know what I mean? And yeah.
You know, obviously he started at the very back. It was the sprint race at the very back, and he came through to finish P6, I want to say. He took an engine. It was 6 because he started 11th, I'm pretty sure, for the actual race. So he effectively made up, like 25 positions over the course of the weekend. That's a mega effort. You watch that, and he was absolutely on it that weekend.
Yep.
I think Hamilton...
And it's not like guys were letting him through either. Everyone was fighting. And you saw throughout the year the theme was, even with Bottas or Perez or anyone who fell back, was that in traffic, a lot of the cars really are quite similar. And especially at Brazil, when you've got, you know, a lot of dirty air in that. So for him to pull that performance out when people were properly fighting him, because a lot of teams needed those points.
And yeah, I think that kind of set the stage for the last few races, where it's like Mercedes poking their head up, Mercedes and Lewis poking their head out, and like, actually, we're still here. Max, I think Lewis won pretty much every single race up to Abu Dhabi, but Max was always P2, P2, P2. So he was always like, the word of the last few races from Red Bull was damage limitation. That was the phrase.
Even in Qatar, when they didn't have the best car, his pace still compared to the rest of the field and even to Checo was insane. Like it was, you know, like Hamilton, like their Merc was amazing around Qatar, but apparently Max was just pulling blinders out to even keep within a few seconds to at least keep him on his toes. You know what I mean?
I want to go back to the first race, because we've talked a lot about the last sort of few races, but I want to go back to Bahrain, because Bahrain was the very first indication that this was going to be a close season. I don't think any of us predicted how close. No. I think it was, but you know, the fight that Max and Lewis had out in front, particularly on that last few laps where that Max got that overtake off track, laps, and you know, and there were I checked the standings at the end of the race, and both of them were like 40 seconds clear of Bottas in third or something, or Perez in third, someone else in third. It was it's like, okay, that sets the standard for the rest of the season.
Yep, it sets the stage. And it's not even... I love how bookended the whole season was. Like, not only was there already controversies from the shooting side, like track limits and that, and how they were allowed to go wide out of, what was it? It was turn 4 or 5, right? And they could go over that kind of curvy bit.
Yeah,
but they technically couldn't overtake there. So the whole point he had to let the place back was because of that kind of controversy. And then, ironically, when on the back straight, Max let Lewis back past, he kind of did it in a really awkward way that... I guess because he assumed he'd get past easily, right?
Yeah.
But he probably should have just done it later on. And then, ironically, when they went into Saudi Arabia and he had to give the place back, that's over the radio where they said, make sure you do it strategically, almost like they were saying, do it right this time. Unlike back at the start of the year.
Yeah.
In one case, Max just let him through really easily, and in the other, it was the complete opposite, and it was chaos. So it's amazing how when you look back through the year, some of the things that happened really early on, that the same stuff happened at the end of the year, but just with tons of pressure. Bahrain, it's and it's still a good race. I went back and I'm like, that was a really good race. Little did we know,
it was hardly there were very few bad races this season. Like, I can think back the last few years, and you can be like, I would say 50%, maybe even more than 50% of the races, I'm just like, well, I could have watched that the next day and been fine.
Yeah. Oh, you have just halfway through the race. I'm just literally gone to bed. Wake up in the morning. So, watch it in the morning.
Yeah, for real. And this season was one of those where it's like, I had to watch, like, even the America races that start at like 3 or 4 in the morning for us. Like, I watched most, if not all of them live, because I'm just like, I have to watch this. Yeah. I have to watch this.
Yeah, any I couldn't see live, I'd wake up early and I'd make sure my phone and everything was fully muted. I wouldn't click anything. I wouldn't touch on nothing, straight onto the race. You know, even if I'm waking up, straight on the phone, I'm, nothing else. So, like, even at Spain, it was a bit interesting because of the whole 2-stop versus 1-stop, which is a thing we'd seen in the past and was a big theme this year, And France was an absolute killer with this strategy. Normally that's a bit of a sleeper, but we actually saw the potential that track has. That track's always good for GT cars. It's good for endurance. it's good for F2, but F1 it just didn't really work since its return. But this year with the strategy, and especially with Checo getting in the mix, like,
So
I
good.
still have such fond memories of that race. That was amazing.
Paul Ricard circuit, it was one that's been so previously absolutely dominated by Mercedes. Like, that was a Mercedes track through and through.
Yes.
And I think this was one of the races where I'm like, oh, okay, we can't, you know, usually we'd go into a weekend and be like, oh, Mercedes is strong here, or Red Bull is strong here. Red Bull wins at France, wins at Paul Ricard, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe we can't trust one team or another being stronger based on historical data and historical evidence, you know.
And that even made practice so much more interesting. I normally chuck it on, but I was even more engaged because you really were looking to see, you know, how much are they slipping around? Are they getting on top of it? Because each weekend, both teams, both very much on a knife edge and struggling and spinning around a bit. And they were very much obviously trying to, you know, push it to the limit and then tone it down to a point where they could drive it. Just all these extra variables just made the whole weekend itself so much more interesting.
I want to talk about a team that I think they deserve a lot more credit than maybe they're being given. I think the resurgence of Ferrari deserves to be discussed. They have absolutely killed it this year, with Carlos coming into that team. You know, it only took him a couple of races to basically be matching Charles. Those last sort of 5 or 6 races, they just were absolutely on it, and they're showing.
They were, yeah.
They're showing signs of the pace that they used to have in, you know, years ago when they were, you know, top 3 teams, and they obviously were third, by quite a distance in the end. They were like 50 points ahead of McLaren, which is insane to think about given how dominant McLaren seemed.
What a dominant start McLaren had, yeah.
Yeah. I actually found out, because I did some maths. Turkey onwards, Ferrari outscored McLaren 143 points to 41, and it's like, well, that's that'll
where
do
it
it.
came from.
Yeah, so they got more than 100 points, like 100 points more than McLaren did just in the last 7 rounds.
Their consistency at the end of the year was just insane.
And I think they qualified really well, and then they struggled with race pace early on. So
yes, that was a big issue early on.
So you know, whatever they did sort of midway through the season, it definitely helped them, particularly on that race pace, to be able to to get those Hall of points.
When you look at the end results, you don't look at it and go, one smashed the other. You go, no, they probably equally, you know, were as good as each other, and both really good as well. You know, the team obviously came together and really worked hard to turn the car around. Going into next year, I guess that's a really good sign that it's like, you'd argue that out of every team on the grid, they probably developed and got their crap together better than any other team from when they started, right? So that's a pretty good sign. It bodes very well. So I mean, in general, we hope to see any teams up there, but you still, you know, Ferrari is a name that a lot of people know for a reason, right? Yeah. Especially with 2 new drivers, young drivers, it will be amazing, you know.
Yeah, you don't want to see Ferrari in 7th in the constructors. Like, that's not good. It's just not good.
Or
for
see
the
them
sport.
squabbling with themselves or whatever. You know, you want to see them really showing that strategy. Those brilliant minds they've got behind the scenes. They're strategists,
Absolutely.
you know, that can. You know, no more of that, the photos with the clowns on the pit wall after every race that we saw on Twitter.
They couldn't race. Because Binotto was basically never at the track, so he was always back at home base. So, you know, you can't
keep the ringleader at home, and then everyone else can focus.
Yeah. Well, I think they have quite possibly the strongest driver pairing of the teams going into the new regulations as well. That's if they can get a car together, they're going to be hard to beat, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see what happens for next year, but very, very good signs for Ferrari. I guess on that note, I also want to talk about McLaren and how well they started, and like they sort of did the opposite to Ferrari, where they started so easily the top in the midfield, and then towards the end, you know, they scored 41 points. They just sort of dropped off a little bit. They showed a little bit more pace in the last race at Abu Dhabi, and showed that, you know, there is still something there, but
there was quite a lot of bad luck there as well. If
True,
you see punctures and failures and
the punctures,
and that, so but I mean, ultimately it does come down to, when you look at the start, is that Norris was driving out of his skin, doing amazing, and then you looked for the guy who everyone thought would be doing even better than that. Of course, Danny Rick, you did see it was like a proper challenge for him, and you thought, yeah, he's going to come here and just, bullseye, and everyone was like, oh, this is the year for Lando to really show what he's made of, and then, yeah, Lando really showed what he made of, but not just because he beat Danny Rick, that was almost like a given. Anyone who could say at the start of that year would have beaten Danny Rick. He really struggled, and if he was on top at the start of the year, as, the two Ferrari drivers were, then they arguably would have been fine, but he really did struggle early on. I think that was a big shock to a lot of people. Even to himself, it sounded like he really had to dig deep. And yeah, it's good because I think as we see now towards the end of the year, he did turn around, he did find a way to get that car to work. But still, I think it bodes well for next year, considering you'd say that they're maybe more equal, similar to the Ferrari drivers, but still at a high level. To be that far ahead and then still to fall behind Ferrari, it's got to hurt a bit, but it's interesting how that story developed throughout the year.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I also want to point out that this is something I found out maybe yesterday or 2 days ago. McLaren, they got the only 1-2 finish in a race all season.
That's right.
Which is insane to think about, given, Red Bull Mercedes dominance out in front, that McLaren was the only one to finish 1-2 on the podium.
Yep.
Granted, that was because of the Max parking his car on top of Hamilton.
Crash, but at that point, they were still commanding that race. If you remember, it was Danny Rick into T1, took the lead, I believe, because he was starting P2 after the sprint race, I believe it was.
He jumped him off
So
the
even
line.
though there was that clash, they were still struggling up to that point, and McLaren, had a hold on that race. With Bottas and Checo, kind of out of the sorts. So they genuinely, I think the amazing thing about that was it wasn't like you had weather or some freak reason that meant that they're out front, right? They were there because they were there on pace, and especially when we had a weekend with a sprint race, even more so they had to be out there on raw pace, and they went 1-2 in that race out of raw pace, and it was amazing, just to go, they properly, have turned this page. And I think it's easy to forget that, of course, this is their first year with the Mercedes in the back of that car, right?
Yes, yeah.
And there was all this chatter about, they've got to spend their development tokens on it. They might really struggle to get it together. So when you put that into the equation as well, for them to do as well as they did, and to, do so well at Monza, the Temple of Speed, shows that obviously those guys working on the engine there should be paid, a quadruple bonus for Christmas.
I don't know how much of a difference we're going to see next year, but I think the general hope is at least that gap between the sort of McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull Mercedes gap will start to close, and given the trajectory given the trajectory of both Ferrari and McLaren for this season and how they have developed their cars, I think it's very plausible. It's still a big question mark because no one's driven the cars, but it at least looks good in that respect.
The whole thing about the whole track limits and stewarding thing, right? I did get to touch on him for a tiny bit. I don't think looking back on this season that you go, oh, it could have been a greater season, but it was blemished by the stewarding throughout the year, right? I think because of this tension, because of, having a new team in the background, because unfortunately, if Charlie Whiting passing away and just having a really hard year to control. And already, it had a few years of kind of ambiguity with the rules and track limits changing and controversies and that. And I think actually it's great that this year had so many of those examples brought up, because now I think, especially with what Mercedes are trying to do,
they can address them,
in regards to the rules, in regards of saying, we'll let this go, but in agreement of, this getting investigated, that doing it. I think heading forward, it's almost like a great year that this happened, but it didn't happen so much that it ruined everything. There will be some people that will argue.
Yeah, I was about to say some people would argue otherwise. But,
yes, but the general consensus is, I think you look back and you go, no, overall it balanced out as well. I think everyone agrees if you look overall, it actually balanced out, so no one was more, hurt than others. What better time for everyone, and I mean everyone, FIA drivers and all that, to sit down and actually go, okay, let's do a full flesh out, while this is all restarted, everything's changing, and jump into next year. I was listening to a BBC podcast that they do with Jack Nicholls and Jolyon Palmer and their cast. And they brought up, when they were talking about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, but they were less talking about it for the race and more talking about what can we do to try and change stewarding. And one of the brilliant points I think they brought up was we still have this process where stewards are kind of selected at random, or there's no real super training for them. And the example they gave is, what if we had a football match and one of the referees was just one of the guys that are in the stadiums, and one of the other two guys were just people that used to play football 20 years ago, you know, and you'd go, you wouldn't put those guys in charge of being referees or in any, you know, sport that needs a referee like that. And yet in F1 we do. Let's get a rolling crew, even if it's maybe, I don't know, 3 different teams that go around, so you don't have the same guys at every race.
Yeah, like a rotating.
Properly train them. Yeah. Why don't we actually just pay them, and then there's a precedence, you know, that they have to do a certain job.
Yeah.
Train them up, reformat that rule book. If you go back to that podcast and listen to it, the discussion is really good. They bring up some amazing points between them. And I agree. I think it's not just changing the rule book. I think you really do have to change stewarding. Because while things were easy for the past few years, and maybe once a year they made a bad call, that was fine. But in a year when there's been so many controversies, it really shows that actually having this format of stewarding has a lot of weaknesses, you know. And even at the last race, we had, you know, Alan Jones, who I'm sure, you know, he's a great guy, but he raced, you know, last time in the 1980s, you know, like his experience of being live on the track isn't going to be that fresh hot, you know what I mean?
I genuinely hope Mercedes keep good on that. One of the things I read, what the FIA need to not do now with Mercedes removing their appeal for the end of the championship, the FIA can't be like, oh, we've got away with one here. You know, they need to be, and I think Mercedes not so much have a job, but I kind of hope they persist with that. And I hope a lot of the drivers, because I know a lot of the drivers were really upset. Obviously, George Russell showed how upset he was on Twitter with that one.
Yes,
a lot of the drivers in the post, like Lando, in the post race, were like, I'm not sure that was okay. I'd like to see all the drivers and all the teams in discussion with that, and you know, keeping them honest. When they get it wrong, they can be like, you know, all the teams, or they could just be like, no, that's you. This goes against what we went last year, and there can be consequences from that. So I think it's a good thing as long as you know, everyone's involved, and you know, and I think Mercedes should hopefully be at the forefront of that. And
it does sound like that's kind of what's happening.
Well, the other point I wanted to talk about like Alpine, Aston Martin, but specifically Alpine, because Alpine I think was similar to Ferrari at the start, where you know, I was watching through the race highlights and I'm like, oh, they're qualifying like 6th every race. Like the first few races, like, oh, they're up there, they're qualifying well. And then their race pace was just kind of not there at all. Obviously, you know, Ocon won the Hungarian Grand Prix, but you know, he didn't have to fight with Lewis or Max. Unlike Ferrari, they didn't seem to make the same gains. Like they would have these you know, these really good qualifying sessions, and then throughout the race they just drop back and back and back and back and back, and they would just have nothing there. So and I feel like that was similar to when they were Renault. I think they had a similar issue, didn't they? They would always qualify really well, and then no race pace, and so whatever those issues were, they haven't quite gotten on top of them. I think that if they can get that race pace, obviously new cars, whatever, but if they can get that race pace to the same quality that their qualifying pace is, I think they could be very, very strong.
Referencing another great video from the race a few months ago where they talked about things that they can actually carry into the new cars. And of course, a big part of that is knowledge. And that's, I guess, why we've seen so many transfers behind the scenes of certain critical technical people, because knowledge really does matter. And, you know, regardless of what your regs are, if you can understand how to balance having a quick car and quali in the race, you know, to any kind of set of rules, then, you know, you'll be good to go. I think what I find interesting about Alpine, you did mention Aston Martin as well, especially earlier on in the year, was that they were two examples of teams, I think, that did really have those track differences where almost, I think, looking into the past, you could see tracks that they were going to be really strong at and really weak at. But they still had flashes of brilliance, and I think that's what... It was almost... The new rules are supposed to bring in more of these moments where we can have flashes of brilliance. I guess this is more a trend for the whole season. But this year, still, with the slight changes they made to the cars, did mean that we also, you know, had flashes of brilliance. It's still interesting how Alpine was another one of these teams, as you say, that almost like Ferrari at the start, they qualified really well, but they fell back. But then they still had those magic moments that could pop up here and there. When there's even factors I didn't realize until more recently in terms of like the track quality and everything can matter too, you know. And sometimes they'll resurface a track and suddenly things will change. I mean, look no further than Turkey last year. And even Turkey last year compared to Turkey this year was completely different because they actually redid the track, you know. So just quickly on Aston, it was interesting how really the start of the year, if you remember where they were last year, they basically ended on a high with a win from Checo, and Checo finished, I think it was fourth in the Drivers' Championship. When they went into this season, of course, and they cut down the area on the back, which really mattered for those low-rate cars, we saw Mercedes kick up a bit of a fuss about it, but ultimately because they're Mercedes and they've got smart minds in that and probably a bit of money as well that they had aside.
For sure.
They were able to develop through it. But then you saw Aston really just were completely out of their element, and almost even shown more, of course, that they'd just copied the design, because if they made it themselves from their own concept, they could probably then develop it.
Good point.
Yes, but it was very clear that, as the year went on, even towards the end, they were absolutely nowhere. And even when they were somewhere, they were spinning, crashing, doing all sorts. And even though they had Vettel, who some people were arguing could do if and there.
Pre-season testing, I think Vettel had like half a day of running, maybe. He had so many issues in pre-season testing, he could not even get really any laps in that car at all leading into the season, which any sort of preparation helps, and he had basically none. That definitely didn't help matters with him either coming into the team as a new driver. So it is interesting how the whole point of, Papa Stroll coming in, the whole point of Aston Martin coming in, his name is to show that there's all this fundamental, massive backing behind the scenes. And yet the first real year we've seen of that is that they've just started near the back and they've just completely fallen off the trot. Even in the last few races, they were nowhere. Yes, people will argue, well, they probably just switched really early to their development next year and that. But I think it also, again, proved this kind of, I guess, fundamental development culture behind the scenes, and in times where if they get it right, then they're going to smash the year. But if they get it wrong, then they really can't be flexible enough to do anything with it. So we've got actually quite a few more questions than I expected for this one as well. But got a couple of questions from Noops. So Noops asked 2 questions. The first one is, how many times do you think the Silverstone crash will be played in the new Drive to Survive season?
Sometimes, though, they have covered races where there's been some massive exciting thing that's gone on, but they've chosen to focus on a completely different story that you might not even notice on the day. Let's say if they do show it, it depends how much it appears on the episode on Silverstone and how much they throw it in elsewhere. Like,
I was about to say later. Later when another incident happens and they fade it in the background like a meme. It's like, it's happening again.
When they're reviewing Bahrain and Mazepin's spinning and they go, sometimes drivers just get it wrong and they have horrific accidents, and then they cut to Silverstone. They'll find a way to cut to it every race. What should we make a bet? Does it count as... What are we counting? Are we counting just in the episodes or in the trailer?
He said season. They said season, so full season.
The whole season. I'll go 6.
I'll go 8.
Okay,
I'm gonna say they're focusing on that Max Lewis battle, and they're also gonna make it, even though it was already drama filled enough as it is, they're gonna go over the top, and it's gonna be really fake anyway. All right, second question from Noops. What do you think of the precedent set by the stewarding decisions such as Brazil and the finale have for F1 moving forward, assuming no drastic rule changes? Well, I guess I'll say I do think there will be rule changes, but assuming no drastic rule changes, the precedent is that they can do whatever they want, I guess. If they don't change any of the rules and nothing changes, I'll be very, very disappointed. Because the precedent they set... You'd be
surprised,
but the precedent they set, particularly at Brazil, I think, that was a big one, because it's like, what dictates what is fair and what's not, because that was the one that's like, okay, but we've had pretty much very similar, almost exact scenarios where they would have been given a penalty, but this one wasn't given a penalty because reasons?
Exactly.
Like that, okay, 2 more questions from Crosso Dog, or Sam. He comments these ones as well. So he's got one question. It's more a statement, but first one is, sprint races, just let us know why they are bad. And I think in...
I like how that's worded.
In the current format, they're not fantastic. That they just kind of exist and they're just there, and they're like, okay, that happened. But I don't... Outside of maybe Lewis moving up through the field in Brazil and the lap 1 Max move on Lewis, which is the precursor to almost the exact same thing, but Max being on the short end of the stick for the actual race, I don't remember much from the sprint races, like, at all.
I remember Checo spinning in Silverstone. I don't think there was any real negatives from them. There was no real positives or negatives in terms of the actual racing, but I think what I really liked is this whole thing where it really made it feel like a 3-day weekend. It's actually added then an event each day, which gets you excited for. And I think as well, even, and this is a separate discussion where some people have said, should we have less practice? Having that one practice session before quali as well really, I think, changes things. And you could say, well, that's
like
not
that as a
directly
concept,
because of...
yeah.
Yeah, that's not directly just because of the sprint race. That's just because it was convenient to do it. So I think even if it has no real positives, if it has no real negatives either, if it does add, I remember being quite enjoyed those weekends, because then you do the sprint race, you go, well, we still got more to look forward to this week,
True.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as far as from the team side, when they chatted about it, I don't think, there was some concerns that, the extra running and the extra costs and whatever there, but I really think that could be equaled out by, the extra interest on it. So, I think from that perspective, look, if there's not too many negatives, I'm still for it. I don't think you do it every time, but I think especially on those weekends, we have the big races, I don't mind doing it. Like, I think the 3 that we went to this year made logical sense.
The format that they've set currently, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I don't like the idea of, well, it's a sprint race, but the sprint qualifying setting the grid for the race. I think qualifying setting the grid for the feature race, that needs to stay regardless of whether there's a sprint race. I actually like how sort of the Formula 2, Formula 3 does it. For some reason, no one likes reverse grids, but if you keep the sprint race separate from the qualifying feature race, and then do a reverse grid and make it less points like it is in F2, then if you're fighting for a championship or if you're way far ahead and you don't want to risk, you don't want to risk crashing out or whatever. Or even if you do crash out, it's like it's not going to you're not going to start at the back of the grid for the feature race. So it gives you incentive to sort of maybe try something, but also if it's close in the championship and you need those points, okay, now you need to fight through the field. You need to get those extra points. I agree
with you. You could change it up like that. I didn't think about it from that side and how you could improve it.
Well, I just think they had a perfect template already. They had the template, and then they like, we're going to try this template instead. And it's like, but you had a template. Why just try that? Maybe they didn't want to try sprint races and reverse grids at the same time.
Yeah,
maybe that's too many
something
things.
Internally the teams didn't want to do. Of course, they have to greenlight these things.
True.
But I'm not.
But I think
it does seem like it's a compromise. And again, if we're going down this whole culture of we want to do things to make it more exciting, well, that sounds pretty good. It works for F2. You occasionally get some guy that just sneaks in P10 unexpectedly in F2, and then he's starting on pole. And that's often quite exciting to see everyone try to get past him or her.
All right. Second question from Sam. I think season-long talking points are consistency and decision-making from the stewards. I think we've already touched on that. Inter-team battles, including Latifi actually starting to match George Russell at the end of the season. And track modification train we are on with Spain, Australia, Abu Dhabi, etc. Is it helping? Well, I guess we'll start. Inter-team battles is something that we haven't really talked about outside of a couple of teams. But Latifi, I think he out-qualified George in 2 qualifying sessions, but he was actually getting relatively close to George. I don't know if I'm not sure how much is due to Russell not getting the pace that he normally would get out of it.
He did seem a bit kind of off it in the last few.
But the fact that Latifi's around for another season, the team's seen enough in him to be like, okay, we're happy enough with where you are. We'll keep you on.
And I think with Albon coming in too, that seems like a pretty good benchmark between those two.
I still don't see him doing much more, but
no, but he gets some more credit than he did at the start of the year. And he went, okay, he's here.
Sure.
What are we gonna? How's he gonna go again? When they re-signed him, you didn't feel just like, oh god, like get rid of him, stop wanting the money, get someone else in there. You kind of went, no, okay, that's fair enough. And when it is critical to keep a driver on for the next year for stability reasons, from what I hear, he works very well behind the scenes, which always helps, especially going to something like next year. So
Raikkonen, Giovinazzi.
There wasn't. I was listening to, I think it was Tomo talk about it before. how he was reviewing his predictions. One of them he talked about was what was going to be the most fierce battle. And I'd say in general, I think most teammates did pretty well to work together, and they were at a similar level, or even if they weren't, the gap wasn't that big. Or I mean, what the real biggest drama, I guess, was between the two Haas guys, but I think we already knew that was going to be the case, because it's a stressful culture anyway there, so you can't really blame anyone if they're a bit iffy with each other. Yeah, especially because they're both young and they're both trying to prove themselves. And especially when you've got the one with a great name behind them and which has a lot of expectation, then one with a lot of negative connotation behind them and what they represent and trying to prove themselves too, and by the sounds of it is getting a bit of the let's say less fair treatment. And then apparently with Mazepin getting if there was new developments or things when they did have them, apparently most of the time they would go to Mick rather than to Mazepin, because of course he's the quicker driver, so they figured so. But then you wouldn't say, oh, well, that's because both drivers are off the rail. You wouldn't, you look back to in the previous few years, and even, again, referencing Drive to Survive, and you see how heated some of the arguments in Haas got in the past between Gunter Steiner and the two drivers, and how much squabbling there was, and, door smashing and everything like that. Yep. And in comparison, you just say, no, this is, for totally different reasons. And, considering hopefully next year they're not going to be as poor as they are, most of that will probably actually be cleared up. They'll be less focusing on squabbling for the last place and more focused on
the actual racing,
battling other cars and doing better for the team as a whole, rather than just wasting time really trying to get used to everything. For the most part, I think most of the new teammates and even returning teammates have worked together quite well. There's been few real rivalries between teams, and most of the time they've either been close-ish or it's been almost just like expected ones ahead of the others. So
like Alonso, Ocon, I think they both did pretty well on that team. I would say, Alonso came into that team and did. He kind of matched Ocon pretty much immediately.
He did well. When we expected, a lot of people were saying, that was a point I did write down, a lot of people were expecting Alonso to come in and they were like, is this going to be another Kubica or a poor return or something, where he's just kind of straggling and he's gone, I've tried it. But you'd say no, he felt like he'd been there, he'd never left, you know what I mean? He was as good as any other driver out there, even better on some of those days.
Vettel, Stroll, I think Vettel, by the end of the season, he could get more out of the car than Stroll could. Gio, Kimi, I don't know if there's much to say there. There's
not much to say. They seem to be best mates behind the scenes.
Yeah, they really do. Yeah.
You see videos of them and they're always laughing.
You've seen the Nürburgring videos, where Kimi's taken Gio and scaring the shit out of him driving around the Nürburgring. And the big one is probably AlphaTauri.
With the gap,
that's a
the gap in the middle
gap.
Of the year. If you cut out every race except for the first two and the last two, you actually go, hey, this is pretty close.
Oh yeah, they're pretty good. Yeah, I think we've talked about the top two teams, but Bottas and Perez were always going to play a backseat to Max and Lewis this year. Yeah, so,
which they both kind of did. I guess equal to each other. They both could have done better, but they both at some points were very critical. So
yeah, for sure. Anyway, and the last point of that question is the track modification train. Is it helping? And again, we talked about this in the previous video very briefly. I think that the point or the conclusion that we came to is maybe not necessarily for this season, but it's obviously that this has been set up for the new cars, so for the 2022 cars and beyond. So I don't know that we can make a call until we see the cars driven around those tracks.
It's nice that it sets a precedent going forward that they're open to making changes like that. And if it doesn't work, then you'd hope, okay, then let's actually go back, see why it didn't work, and try something again new, you know what I mean? So it sets a different precedence going forward. Before it was like, oh, the track's crap. Well, you stuck with it for 10 years, have fun. We'll go, great, okay, well, we'll just write it off and go to bed early for it every time it comes around. Instead, actually, they're going, no, okay, it doesn't work. We'll try it again, you know? So
that's good. All right, so this one from, how do you pronounce it? Is it Volley Ray or Volley Ray?
I think
Volley.
So, yeah. Most people just say Volley, right? I think most people say Volley.
So what were your is the few questions in here, but what were your personal highlights of the season? What was your favorite race of the season? And who was your star driver of the season? So, personal highlights of the season. I think we've touched on a few of them, but I'll go through my personal. I'm going to be incredibly biased because, I've been...
well, it's our personal. That's what personal means. Let your bias flow.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite the one that will stick in my mind forever is George Russell getting P2 at Spa in that qualifying. I don't think I've been ever, like, all season, I don't think I've been as excited as when Russell put that on, like, provisional pole, only for Max.
Or as tense while he was on provisional pole. Yeah.
Max is a bastard. Robbed Russell of his maiden win. That one definitely sticks with me. The Hungary race where Hamilton started on pole,
that was amazing.
Is one of those images that will be burned forever into my memory. The last 5 laps of the Russia race was a big one. That was incredibly tense with, the rain falling, Norris out ahead, and hearing all the team radios and all the cars, the chaos that ensued from that.
As I said, the season in a whole was kind of a best moment.
It kind of was, yeah.
Overall, yeah. I mean, the ones you mentioned were good. Seeing moments where Checo was allowed to really show what he can do, I guess, was a highlight. When I had to defend or he had to attack.
Wow, what a surprise. You're talking about Checo.
This is the first proper year thing where I don't really have a team that I'm following since I started following F1, so I'm also more following the driver. So,
sure, yeah, makes sense.
Of course, with Baku happening, it's notable as well. I'll bring it up. Was all there was a lot of tire failures this year, which spiced things up massively to everyone, and punctures and all sorts. I don't know if you call it a highlight, but it just stuck out to me, I guess, if that counts as well for this this discussion. As we said, just at Baku as well for 2 drivers, and even at Qatar wasn't it? Yep. At Abu Dhabi, of course, there was some potential issues and all, so looking back at all the race highlights, it's just something every race highlight. You go, that was a highlight for my year, and then you go, next race, that was a highlight for my year. Being able to see Lewis getting challenged by someone at his level or above, and seeing, not just 2 drivers that are kind of giving each other a bit of if and af, but seeing them really just race each other hard. The fact that we got to see strategy, I think, actually that's what I think my biggest highlight for the whole year.
I was thinking the same thing as the strategy.
Is actually having to see teams properly use strategy and seeing 2 stop versus 1 stop and seeing them go for it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, and just I often when things were boring, that's all we could go on was trying to figure out some sort of strategy or following the strategy of the lower teams. Shout out to the strategists, I think that's got my MVP of the year. Is the strategists.
Yeah,
whether they got it right or wrong, it gave us amazing.
Made it interesting. Yeah, 100%. Anyway, personal favorite. What was your favorite race of the season? This one I don't even know because there were so many good races. Imola was a standout for me, with it being sort of a wet to dry race. The Lewis lock-up as he was overtaking back markers, the Bottas Russell collision, the Williams and the Mercedes coming together, and Max and Lewis setting the precedent early as he's forcing him over these curbs, and he's it was just like we had the really good race from Bahrain, and it was always that fear that going into that second race, it's just like, oh, okay, we've had our interesting race, now we have our boring race. There was always something happening, I feel like, at Imola, and the fact that I guess the drivers really like that circuit. It's something a bit different with these new cars as well. I really, having that race right after already a really good first race, I'm just like, this is going to be a really good season, I think, all the way through. France, again, that was good just because of strategy. Baku, it was because of just the chaos that happened. You could argue Monza.
I was about to say Monza, if I had to pick one, it's Baku, Monza, or Abu Dhabi, I think. Again, it was that culmination of everything. It was the strategy coming into it. It was, the random stuff happening. It was Checo, you know what I mean? It's like, for me personally, all those elements were there.
True, yeah. Russia was one of those ones. Over the whole weekend, Russia was so good because, obviously Max took his engine, so he started from the back, but he ended up finishing P2 because of the chaos. And you're just like, I didn't even realize until the race finished. The qualifying was wet to dry, so whoever pitted for dry tires in that Q3 ended up on
That's right, I forgot
top
about
3.
that.
Lando, Carlos, George starting top 3. Forgot about that. I went back and watched. I'm just like, oh yeah, that happened. That was pretty. Yeah, it was pretty fucked, wasn't it? Hamilton crashing into the pit wall in Q3, so they couldn't get out and get in a good lap to start.
And then they got one lap on the 2 everyone needed to heat up the tyres.
Bottas took his new engine because he didn't do well, and I guess the idea was he wanted to try and hold up Max, but he didn't do that because Max got past immediately and then started charging through the field. Hamilton was racing through and caught up to Norris, and Norris was holding him off, and then the rain started to fall, and then Yeah, no,
And
you know
all
what?
the
It's
calls
Russia.
there to make on the
Yeah.
fly. Russia's up there.
Yeah, it might actually be Russia for me. Imola just because of the precedent that it set for the rest of the season, but Russia for a race that for so long has been
In contrast as well.
It's been such a garbage race for the last I don't even know how many years, and everyone's been saying to get rid of it, myself included.
Which they are, I think, going to a different location
in
a few years or two. Yeah,
but
regardless of how good that's going to be, but that sets a precedent.
I think it was only because like a lot of this was due to the the rain, which obviously does help. But man, that was such a good race. I might have to just go with Russia. So star driver of the season, mine's going to be Carlos. It has to be.
Outside of the top two?
Yes, I'm trying to avoid. I could have said. I was going to
say, it's much harder outside of the top two.
You could argue Max. Completely fair opinion. You could argue Lewis because in, a lot of that season he was under pressure in a weaker car and he still managed to come through and take the lead of the championship at a lot of points and take the fight to Max in what in the first half was probably the weaker car. But over the course of the season, with everyone, the drivers that change teams and them, like you said, with Vettel struggling to get in that Aston, with Ricciardo struggling to get into that McLaren, with Perez struggling to get into that Red Bull initially, Carlos came in and he was on it pretty quickly, and his consistency throughout the year, and then his pace towards the end where he was outpacing Charles. Who is, like I said, the prodigal son of Ferrari. I said that in the previous video, and he can now match and outpace him in the same car in his first year. It just shows just how good he was this season. So I would probably say Carlos. So
I think then I have to go with Lando. In his first 10 races, he had one position that was lower than 5th at the end. Like the fact that he had, 3 podiums, before it even hit the summer break. And it's, as I say, it's harder to remember because the second half of his year, I still think because of things out of his control. It was not as memorable as the first half, but I just remember some amazing drives and laps from him. And even just at the start of some races, he was up there, and even if he fell back later, he was always keen to fight. He very rarely put a foot wrong and, smashed someone out by accident.
If Lando gets the right car, he'll win a championship. I don't have any doubt about that. I think we said in the lead up to this season, I think we both agreed it's just like, while he's done well, this needs to be his breakout year. And
compared to his teammate, as we say, he had a teammate who everyone thought he was really going to struggle against, and he blew him out of the fucking water. You know what I mean? Early on, he was up there getting podiums, while Danny Rick was struggling to score a point. And
struggling to get out of Q2 a lot of the time, Q1 sometimes,
and he was based on that. Yeah,
it's good. All right, last two. These ones are from Upjohn. Hello, Upjohn.
Hello,
how you doing, buddy? We've touched a little bit on this, but there was one point he made in this question that I really want to talk about. He said, "Are there any rule changes that you think will be needed coming out of this season? For example, 2 I can think off the top of my head. One was the inconsistency to the race directors. I think we've covered that enough. But the second one is the extra power Mercedes got from a new engine, which made it look like they could take a new engine every race and finish on the podium. So the way the penalty system works for taking new parts is stupid, where it's like they get it. So the way the system works is they get a 10-place penalty for taking anything more than 3 parts, except for something, I think gearboxes they get a bunch of, or there's like certain parts they get an extra allocation, but any like the ICE or the MGOH or the MGUK or the control electronics or something else, anytime they take a 4th one, they get a 10-place grid penalty. And then if they take a subsequent one, they get a 5-place grid penalty, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's like, why? Why is it less? Why is it less? It doesn't make sense. It should be like you get a 10-place grid penalty, and then if you take another one, it's like, oh, okay, no, you start from the back of the grid. Every single time you take a new one, you start from the back of the grid now. And that's just the way it works. That way you can't qualify like Lewis did. He can come out of in Brazil, he can go through the sprint qualifying and make it up to P6. And even though he took a new ICE, a brand new ICE, and it was his like fifth or sixth one or something, he could start P11 and then win that race. It's just like, why?
And having that in the bag as well, it gave him so much advantage later on, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's why they were so strong in those last few races. Like, obviously Red Bull were complaining that, not complaining, they were just questioning, is like, where are they getting the straight line speed from? It's because they had these fresh engines that just, I think the idea is that the Mercedes engine have, like, their maximum power output is, like, higher, but then it hits a drop off compared to the Honda engine.
It crashes a lot more while the Honda is kind of consistent until something goes kaput.
I think that's a rule that they definitely need to look at, because to me it just doesn't make a lot of sense the way it works right now. It needs to be they take the 10 place, fair enough, that's fine. Every subsequent part after that has to be 15, 20, or, just every subsequent part after that, just start from the back of the grid. And if they take even, say, more than 6, then it's like, okay, now you start from the pit lane.
I think overall I agree that the system maybe needs to be looked at, because this has at least shown, again, it's another point for this year where something has happened that has shown a potential grey area, or not necessarily a grey area, but something that could be something that's not working potentially how logically it should be working, right? So it might need to be tweaked and that looked into. So
the only other rule change, or the only other rule, which I think there's already been a few comments on it, but it's the way the points distribution is done after the Spa debacle, about how the race distance and you get half points, and how they can do 2 laps under a safety car and they can be given half points. And I think that's a system that definitely needs to be taken a look at, where I think they just need to increase one of the things I read was like, okay, so at least 25% of the race has to be done under green flag conditions to be able to get half points, and then you can still have that cut off for 75%.
Because I forgot there was that whole controversy. They seemed like they were just filling in the laps to get to the part where they could award it, right?
Exactly, right. Massey has said otherwise they actually wanted to get it going. Whatever you want to believe.
Yes.
That's up to you. But the other things that they sort of brought up after the race as well, which this is less to do with rules and more to do with other things. But Ross Brawn said he's going to be looking at improving the wet weather racing to try and reduce. I think the biggest thing is the reducing the spray from the back of the tires. Like, obviously the wet tires, they clear so much water that it's like a haze of white that you're driving through. You can't see anything. But they have to have the tires like that, otherwise they aquaplane, which you even saw with Lando crashing out, aquaplaning going into Eau Rouge. And it's like, I don't know how much they can do just yet, but they're saying they're looking into whether they can improve the racing to reduce the spray while also preventing aquaplaning, so that way you don't get these scenarios where you can at least get some racing in these wet conditions. So Braun seems to believe that the 2022 cars might improve the spray already, just with the concept that they have. But they apparently F1 have already started research into improving it. And last question from Upjohn: how will Haas perform next year? The only team not to get a point. They were a bit shit this year. I think we sort of expected it going into the season, but I don't know if I expected them to be this shit.
I thought they would be worse, I think.
Yeah.
The fact that they're already struggling at the end of last year, and they'd made it very clear they were literally just using the same car with bits cut out at the back to fit the rules.
Yeah.
Really made you think, okay, they're going to be literally nowhere, because every other team is at least doing a little bit of development, right, or changing things up, or has a new ring or whatever, and they basically went, no, we're literally doing absolutely nothing. And with 2 new drivers who hadn't had any experience with the team, again, even if they were going to be worse or whatever, I think it was less less a shock because they were very clear about it. At the end of the race, we kind of just went, yeah, they were back there, but we know why they're back there. We're not going, what's happening? If the designers, have they lost their, if their employees all left, what's going on?
Yeah.
We're just like, no, we already told you. And everyone went, okay, fair enough.
Haas have probably been developing their car for longer than any other team, seeing as they've cut development of the 2021 car pretty much as the season started. They're like, yeah, we're 100% focused on 2022's car now. So you would say that they're probably one of, if not the team that's been developing that car the longest. And given what performances you have seen from Haas when they first entered the sport, gives me hope that with a new car and them having a full year to develop it, it gives me hope that they can. I don't know if they can go P5, P6 in the first race next year.
But you just hope they're fighting, that they're up there and there's not really a back mark.
Yeah.
We still see them as the back mark are. We don't, we're hoping not to see that. And they still have most of the same guys up the top there and most of the same engineers who, did that brilliant work to begin with. And they have had that partnership with Ferrari that, you say with Ferrari's upturn, hopefully that's obviously in their favour. So should we make it, on that note, should we make a call on where we think they're going to finish next year? If that's what the question is asking, what do we think out of the 10 teams? At a call right now, though, I'd say 7. I'll say 7.
I'm going to say 8. 8 was my first position. That
I figured you'd go 8.
So.
I'm like, no, I go one higher.
Oh, okay, yeah. We'll say P8, but I can see them jumping Alpha. Williams is an interesting one. They are on an upward trajectory. They have got a good team behind them, but. Yeah, they could still jump them with how long they've developed the car. Williams were the only team not to have a mule car for next year. I don't want to think about next year just yet. I'm going to wait till actual next year before I even start thinking about that. But
Need a mental break as well. From
100%. Yeah.
It's good to reflect on everything, but I imagine after this it'll be a bit, okay.
Yep,
we start to really just forget about it for a few weeks, think about other things in life.
Yeah, hell of a season. I don't know that we'll have a season that exciting for a while. I think I mentioned that in the RBW video as well. If we have one even, 60% as exciting as that, I think it's still going to be better than the last 5 years for the most part of the turbo hybrid era. So I'm excited to see what the new rule changes bring. But this season's been a hell of a way to send off these cars, I guess. Stay tuned for our next video. We do have one last video coming out. We're going to be reacting to our driver predictions, our 2022 driver predictions. And our 2021 season predictions.
I forgot we did the driver predictions.
So we'll be.
I forgot.
We'll be reacting to those ones. That one's going to be a fun video. We're going to be a big react channel now. We've turned a corner. This one's not working. We're becoming a react channel. Thanks for watching. This is again another long one. It was just so much to talk about this season. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Enjoy your Christmas if we get it out before Christmas, or enjoy your New Year or your January. I'm just going to cover all bases.
Or hope that the 2022 season was a good one.
Yeah, it could be that late. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Take care.